Hello, I'm happy to be here. Okay, so in the end of 20th century, Lithuanian social atmosphere was constrained and very predictable. Most of the official photo images, in order to reach the daylight, were marked with an effort to please the Soviet system in one or another aspect. So-called and, I believe, well-known Lithuanian School of Photography, presented by Antanas Luckus, Romaldas Rakauskas, and Aleksandras Macijauskas, and others, in their pictures were celebrating high aesthetics and ideas of humanism, despite optimistic notes in rhetorics of all medias. Hermetic living surrounding could suggest only monotone sameness and great boredom. Art historian Agnė Narušytė, who was quoting me, so now I'm quoting her, has detected and conceptualized the aesthetics of boredom in the works of photographers who emerged in late 80s. It's Alfonsas Budvytis, Vytautas Balčytis, Remigijus Pačėsa, Gintaras Zinkevičius, and others. Photos of young photographers seemed amateurish, content choices accidental, intentions passive. In expressive banalities, boring fragments of visually poor everyday life did not fit into the frames of a humanism and could not serve as a document. It needed a new approach for interpretation. Denial of tradition was their way to ignore the system. The new visual language meant a change in photography. For the last decade, in the discussing the 80s of Lithuanian photography, opposition among those two main generations of photographers was dominating the discourse. Violeta Bubelytė, born in 1956, not yet, is from the same generation as boredom reproduces, but she did not fit well anywhere. She is exception in many ways. Bubelytė did not idealize, aestheticize, or documented Soviet society, but she also didn't deny it by choosing to melt in the poetry of an absence, passivity, and denial of the tradition. The only thing she did, except few efforts to fit in, she took nude self-portraits constantly since 1981 till now. Goal of this presentation is to spotlight bravery of Bubelytė's photography in 80s and to analyze in what context her works could be interpreted. It's a story about becoming more than expected or planned in relationship to photography and visual tradition, social order, and to other women, artists and viewers. Bubelytė's self-nudes represents the will of one person that has changed the pattern of depicting women by many years within few pictures. Those pictures also broadcasted upcoming changes in gender order. Bubelytė's bravery or imprudence, as it was described back then, could be pointed out by 4 facts. She didn't study any arts or photography. This program didn't exist in Vilnius academies till 1996. Men photographers were also self-taught, but there was understanding that technologies are men's field, and I believe that these beliefs sometimes are more strong than rules or opportunities, so-called. The world of photography has been completely dominated by men. The important ones were only men. She not only entered the patriarchal order as equal, but she did it naked. Bubelytė broke free unwritten laws at Soviet time known for rough efforts of keeping everything in order. Her first exhibition, held in 1989 in small Vilnius photography gallery, despite the fact that from 1980s she was a member of Association of Photographers and worked there. So her first exhibition happened only in 1989, after 9 years. She was criticized by public because a nude artist was something unseen before in photography publicly. Moreover, a choice for a Soviet woman to disclose her nudity publicly, not in ladies' beach or sauna, had a mark of indecency. Though specialists supported her beginnings, she got a good word from one of the most intriguing art critics of this time, Alfonsas Andriuškevičius, who explained to everybody in annual International Photographers Seminar in Nida that photography is actually an art. Bubelytė soon was published in journal Krontai. Many could only dream about it. She was recognized by alternative artists for the artistic truth. That was like important imperative of the time. Also should be mentioned that in painting of 80s, censorship didn't work that well as before and could have been noticed changes in the representation of human figures. Heroes became more realistically physical, not idealized. Nudity and sexuality were included in the iconography by Raimundas Lyžys, Arvydas Šaltenis, Kostas Dereškevičius, and many others. As an exception should be mentioned charismatic painter Šarūnas Sauka. He used his own face and naked body in the majority of his phantasmagoric works with horrifying settings. In sculpture, also, a representation of woman's body was changing. Sculptor Ksenija Irašovaitė finally put woman's breast in the right position in her works that carries her own features. Before that, breasts in sculpture made by men were just under the neck, somewhere there. Discontent of some part of the public was not unexpected, considering imperative of moral norms. Sauka was not praised every time too, but it was quite surprising considering the fact that women nudes were a very popular subject in photography made by men at the time. For example, well-known photographer Rimantas Dichavičius made his name with photos of nude young women and girls merged with nature, interpreted as flowers. His album Blossoms Among Blossoms, made in 1969 and 1980, was called his very popular album. In the context of men making woman nudes, Bubelytė's self-images lacked romanticism, animism, and the element of allegory. Her nude body was not extension and representation of a beautiful nature. Neither carried lyrical, erotical seduction hints, nor there was nothing about maternity or virginity. Her nude did not fit into conception of a muse, because to become one, you need someone to be the other, a subject to its object, most probably a man to be inspired. Instead of that, most of the time in Bubelytė's works we see a sharp gaze that stares at us, a cool light that extracts her body as it is, not in the better-looking angle, and we can see the echoes of the visual history in composition. Agnė Narušytė, Bubelytė's strategy of representation describes as mimetic repeating, only made with deliberate mistake that sees it as one of the traits of écriture féminine, the concept developed on writing the body by French feminists Hélène Sixou, Julia Kristeva, and Luce Rigari. In artist interviews, Bubelytė's interviews, and my conversation on the phone when I didn't get one, Bubelytė does not identify with any community of artists, neither any context, and God save none of any social movement like feminism or so. She stresses the lack of information in 80s and how young she was when it all started, and presents herself as a person out of nowhere, contextless. To any question about other artists and her relation to him, her, she objects, becomes suspicious that I claim plagiarism. She talks in modernism paradigm, where the main keywords are form, original, invention. In conversation, she does exactly the same as she does in her pictures. She refuses to be defined. The reasons might be different. Very defining Soviet system might have done quite much, but the strategy is the same as famous gender studies theorist Judith Butler suggests in her concept of performative identity. Avoid the label by any means. I am what I do, quote. Meaning a shifting identity, claims Butler. Bubelytė's melting contours, multi-personality with 100 moods suggest the same. Do not seek for definition. Picturing herself, the artist used to make, and still does, black and white photograph, most of the time uses long exposure. Her settings are studio situation, the space is neutral, close, timeless. The light source and the angle might differ, but it's always the light of a researcher, cold and revealing. In her beginnings, Bubelytė quite often used covering elements, transparent or non-transparent gloves, glass panels. She put the body in the hiding situations, corners, aside the curtain. Under the mirror, she duplicates and triplicates herself, vanishes in the movements. So, to identify with a person in Bubelytė's picture, the viewer has to make a step within imagination to overcome the chosen barrier, cloth, mirror, or so. Semi-hiding in Violeta's photos does not feel like shyness. It's more like invitation to follow her. But to do that, one has to confront her intense gaze. Her eyes are strict. They draw a very clear line to make order and make orders to stop. Inviting and rejecting at once gives attention just like two opposite parts of magnet. It's yes and no altogether. It's complicated. Therefore, it feels like personal truth because most of the time it's complicated. In given situation, we could feel that here meets the longing of human contact and questioning if it's worth at all. Who am I? Asks a woman from the image. This disturbing search of a relation with the self, the other, and the world is just one level of Bubelytė's work. The other deals with the nature of photography and the dynamics of the gaze. Most of the time, not every time, Bubelytė's nude stares at us. Even then, her eyes directed elsewhere, but her face is visible. The gaze is still very active in this scene. As if she feels our look on her body and can turn to us any second. Also matters the fact that her works are understood as series or like endless set. In this context, pictures where she does not look directly in the camera is like pause or in intense action, a brief moment when the author lets herself and the viewer little rest. Scopophilic pleasure described by Laura Mulvey here is not encouraged. Bubelytė is rather phallic because of the gaze that is returned by the object and a fact that a model is the artist. Object and subject is one. Directions of looking goes on both sides to make a circle from a person to a camera and back. The mirrors, curtains behind the body and clothes complicates the space and directions of a look. A mirror held close to the body can show the other perspective of it, but it also can redirect the look to the place that was invisible before for the camera, to the space in front of our object. In that case, we know even more about the personage, and we know it by her will. It stresses her being active, not passive, agent of the scene. In this closed ritual of artist tracing herself, the viewer turns out to be the only one possible passive object, because everything in Bubelytė's works refuses to be described so. We could also accept Bubelytė's refusal to interpret, to understand her images in autobiographical perspective. The body, as a life story beholder, betrays artist's wish, but to Bubelytė's side stands Roland Barthes' description of what happens to a person in front of the camera. I start quoting. Now, when I feel myself observed by the lens, everything changes. I constitute myself in the process of posing. I instantly make another body for myself. I transform myself in advance into an image. This transformation is an active one. I feel that the photograph creates my body or mortifies it according to its caprice. Nevertheless, Bubelytė's identity defragmentation could be described. For the beginning, we have to deal with three players: its artist, body as a life story beholder, and the new body image that posing process gave a birth. But it's not the end. Art historian Francis Borzello, from the social perspective, suggests that self-images made by women in art should be understood as separate genre, because it has different challenges than men's self-images. Women have to deal with representation as a woman and as an artist, and these two has the opposite imperatives. However, women have much longer and richer history of being a model. Borzello insight adds one more player or aspect to the evolving scheme: observed woman. The artist, body as a life story beholder, every time different new personage, and the observed naked woman, quite a company in one picture. All of them has a history in art history and its prototypes. A history not only visual but also mental, which also produces mental prototypes and images. That's why Bubelytė's seemingly simple images has such a firm density of a meaning. All roles mentioned evokes memory of the viewer and starts processes of relating. If we would believe in her visual virginity, Bubelytė's photography could be a good example of autonomous image that seems to have its autonomous life. One of those that Thomas Mitchell asked, "What do pictures want?" Or those that has no link among each other, which Abby Warburg was tracking through ages. I am deliberately mentioning Warburg because he believed that in every one of us survives and lives ghost of all culture. Bubelytė's images impacts immediately. Visual memory starts bringing ghosts out of deaths. Here she is like Egyptian, here she's like bathing muse, over the like beginning of motion photography, here's like Madonna. And Vermeer, letter reader, or Ingress Odaliska. She's one and all women all together. It is fascinating that Bubelytė, without knowing art history well, it was merely possible in Soviet conditions, intuitively runs through all the classics. Therefore, her nudes are not mimetic repeating with a deliberate mistake, but a mysterious emanation of autonomous images and meta-images. Maybe or probably some of the images reach the artist while listing Czech magazines or in the second-hand way via television, films, imagery of surrounding post packages of trivial things. Maybe some directly in exhibitions, conversations, and so on. We will never trace that. I do believe that some of meta-images entered her pictures itself, and it has reached it by relying on the image fully and her instincts. Domination of not verbal, the unconscious scale and connotation instead of denotations in Bubelytė's photography is a queer way that leads us to postmodern paradigm, where modernism keywords are disabled by new ones. Let's say unconscious appropriation, meta-images, deconstruction, and so on. It might seem that I present her in a patriarchal way as an unconscious mystic, an exceptional genius, just like Vasari did in the case of talented women. No, that would be a passive role. Bubelytė is active in all her choices. The paradox is that in today's art context, she becomes everything she didn't want it to be. A great example of a posture that feminism would praise, and someone who is very interesting in appropriation perspective. Bubelytė's path, fearless interpretation of woman body, intention to do everything her way, search for the unique, makes her a good example of a movement, feminism, which has identical goals. Maybe denial of feminism was a lucky circumstance for her art. She didn't follow any program except her intuition. She didn't criticize any system. She filtered it all through her own naked body. Just by being herself, Bubelytė transformed the fixed meanings without having any idea how much she had done. Maybe made a precedent of women taking a free or dominating position in 4 levels at once: in photography, in gender order, in art history, and Soviet regime. She have ignored it all. Thanks.